Hello and welcome to another Legends of Runeterra podcast. And this time I'm joined by Wick once more and by TheSkilledRoy. And we're going to take a look at keywords and what to do for Legends of Runeterra, what keywords we particularly like or maybe also dislike, and what we could or don't want to see in the future. First, let's start with some introductions. Wick, you already joined us for the last episode and probably going to join us for more multiple episodes in the future. Maybe just introduce yourself really quickly if somebody missed the last episode.
Yes, thank you for having me and for inviting me back again. I'm Wick. I'm just, an average Runeterra enjoyer, so glad to be on the pod. Thank you.
And our famous guest, you should probably have heard of him already, especially if you like into custom cards, TheSkilledRoy. Very glad to have you here.
Can you? Jeez, I'm not that famous, but hi. My name's Roy or June. Either one works for me. Basically, I do speculation content and custom card content, and basic research stuff. That's it. Yeah.
You're like underplaying it. Roy was the one who found out about Banner City being the 10th region, basically, and yeah.
Saga, dude. Oh my god.
No, you're a legend, man.
Yes,
let's admit it and accept it.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
We're all legends in hearts. And
true.
Yeah, we're all. It's a League of Legends, right?
Yeah, that's
exactly.
True.
And yeah, today we want to take a look at keywords. So I think like most card games use keywords in some shape or forms, or like words to shorten other stuff. There's like ability words and actual keywords. Like some cards, Legends of Terror actually use the term keyword on them. For example, Victor's Hex Upgrade gives them a random keyword, and the other words on this card, for example, round start, is not something Victor can generate. They're just like normal words or like ability words. And to be honest, it's quite complicated how they work in Legends of Runeterra, because like some can be shared, some can't be shared, some don't even behave like keywords, and especially negative keywords like introduced by the famous card Quicksand disable their positive keywords. This means negative keywords also exist, but what they are exactly is really hard to figure out. From a baseline, there are, if you want to see the shareable ones, these are the randomly obtainable ones. These keywords can be randomly obtained. Impact can stack, so if you have all of these stacked up already on one single card, you will just keep getting more impact stacks, and it doesn't ever run out. And there are some cards that can't be randomly obtained but can be shared, formidable, and double attack, and barrier. Barrier is also the only keyword that only lasts for one round. And yeah, the one keyword I always say is not really a keyword is attach. Attach is just a mess, in my opinion. But basically,
it's very silly.
But basically nothing that interacts with keywords interacts with attach at all. So it's just kind of the same as last breath, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's maybe start with, if you want to learn more about keywords, you can also check out my rulebook, where I list all the random keywords and basically have an introduction to all of them, how they interact, for example, that we have barrier and space shield, what is going to be destroyed first. And all this stuff can be found here. And also like the overview, the barrier, double attack, formidable. Okay. So let's start by what is your favorite keyword? Which one would you like to discuss first? Maybe let's start with our guest, Roy. Do you have like a favorite keyword or something you really like?
Yeah. I think without a doubt, almost objectively, in my opinion, the best keyword in the game is Fearsome. I think Fearsome is everything that is great about having an elusive-esque keyword in the game with quite literally none of the downsides. It gives you the ability to make decks that are tempo-oriented and having like a focus on winning the game quickly and getting underneath the opponent's defensive line, while still feeling that they have an option and multiple ways to stop the cards. In general, Fearsome also interacts really well with multiple ways the game is already exploring with things like minus attack reduction via Frostbite or Quicksand, or obviously just the flat minus attack abilities. In general, they're also really well intelligently designed, where if you look at a lot of the Fearsome, especially in the four drop or lower range, all of them have about will die to a three attack. So if something can block it, it's very clear that it dies to it. In general, Fearsome is just a really well designed keyword across the board. I think it's great.
No, I fully agree. I think the way that kind of related it to Elusives was very funny, and I think we're gonna be able to kind of touch on that later. But I have a quick question, because this kind of ties back into last week's podcast. But Vladimir just received Fearsome, and we talked a lot about Vladimir receiving this in because Nasus also received it, but we didn't really speak on that as much. How do you feel about Vladimir getting Fearsome with the latest patch?
Yeah. So I actually played quite a bit of Scargrounds and Vlad, and him getting Fearsome is neat. It's more of a interesting question, because Fearsome is one of those keywords that specifically gets value, kind of like Elusive, where it really only gets its big parts of its value when you are able to like go wide with it, like having a bunch of Fearsomes, right? Just like how having like one Elusive and like 3 attackers alongside your Elusive still means the opponent has agency on that combat. Having just one unit with Fearsome is a lot less interesting compared to like if Vladimir was a Fearsome-esque card. Because right now, right, he's in the Scargrounds deck, which are literally that entire deck that gets chump blocked to death, right? Like that's their thing, is that they have a billion stats, but they will never be able to get through and deal damage, right? So like the Vladimir having Fearsome really only matters in one way, in my opinion, which is when the opponent goes to block and then do a trick to get them out of it, whether that's like recall, whether that's glimpse beyond, whether that's single combat or whatever. When they use a trick to get out of the way of Vladimir, it's going to cost them a lot more now, right? Because let's say the average unit that could block Vladimir before was 1 to 2 mana. Now you're looking at the 2 to 3, 3 to 4 range, right? Which means that the opponent is going to have to lose a lot more value if they want to just quote unquote fuzzy block Vladimir or ghost block Vladimir. So like it's not super relevant, but it's something, like it's nice, especially considering how historically Vladimir has really been underperforming. I think it's a fine change. It matches flavor. Like I have no issue with Fearsome being added. I don't think it solves the core issues of how reliant the deck is on drawing its landmark. But I think it's at least decent.
Yeah, I think those were all great points. Oh, go ahead.
I find it a little bit sad. Today I tried, I'm doing champ roll battles where I basically roll 2 champions, and today I tried playing Vladimir with Tam Kench and non-Scargrounds, and he still was pretty terrible. And I don't really know, the Fearsome didn't really help that much for these non-Scargrounds archetypes. Still, I think it's very limited to this one.
Yeah, exactly. If they give him Overwhelm or something insane, then he'd be broken, right?
I was just about to say Overwhelm. Yes,
they give him Overwhelm, he'd be insane. So I understand why they didn't do that. Fearsome is Fearsome is such an interesting keyword, because it really isn't a strong keyword on its own. It requires either deck building or a lot of a focused game plan to really make it useful. Like adding Fearsome to Aurelion Soul wouldn't really change that much. You know what I mean, right?
Exactly.
Or anything like that, right? Fearsome basically falls off after turn 5, and then every single card in your deck's goal is to make it so that your Fearsome gets a couple more extra turns of value, right? So a Skitterer turns a turn 5 block point to a turn 6 block point, and so on and so forth, right? So Fearsome is really tempo focused, typically in the decks that focus on it. And then in decks that don't, or decks that have it as incidentally value, it's things like Nasus, right? Where it's just he happens to have Fearsome, and he also lowers his attack later. So then it's then that's where the value of Fearsome comes in. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find it really interesting to compare this to the Magic counterpart, which is Menace. And in Magic, if you are unaware, the combat system is pretty similar, but Menace means that you have to block it with 2 creatures, basically. And in Magic, you can block with multiple creatures and 1 creature. And yeah, I think Fearsome has been done before, thousands of Magic cards So something similar to Fearsome has existed before, but the main go-to for forcing big units in is Menace. And maybe we can illustrate like the core problem here really quickly. Hope this is not too wide. Basically, if you have a blocking system and you have like 1/5/5, you have to do something against just the opponent always throwing 1/1s into it, and another 1/1 into it, and then the 5/5 never gets any value. So basically, 2 ways of pushing these 5/5s, or even just like the 3/2s in the Fearsome case is like Fearsome, where you just say, hey, your 1/1s, your 2/2s, I can't block. Or you say you have the Menace, where you just say you have to block with 2 1/1s. And then you eventually will run out of 1/1s.
Yeah, because eventually, like, you're just gonna keep 2 for 1-ing your opponent until eventually either A, you win, or B, you sort of just they run out of options on you, right? So yeah, both are great ways to sort of encourage that sort of game plan. Although I would also mention that there's also, I think it's a card called Skulk. Is that what it's called in MTG? Skulk, I think it is also really similar to Fearsome, if I can remember.
I think it's the other way around, right? Like they have to have lower value.
It's the other way around. It's the other way around. Yeah.
Can take a look at it. Exactly. I didn't really play that set that much. But I think this creature can't be blocked by creatures with greater power, so you have to have like a lower power. It's like reverse Fearsome.
Yeah. It's like reverse Fearsome. Yeah, I remember that being something that was somewhat similar as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, you had to have small units and to be able to block. But yeah, I think like the main difference between Magic and Hearthstone, Magic and Legends of Runeterra, I think, is that in Legends of Runeterra, like a 3/1 and a 2/3 can team up to take down a 5/5. I guess they can technically do it in MTG as well by double blocking. But if you block this one first, then you block with the 2/3, then the 5/5 dies because it keeps the damage. But in like MTG, you have this constant regeneration. So I think it's like Fearsome just makes less sense.
Yep, exactly. It just makes more sense, and like that's one big thing to speak on in terms of how MTG sort of handles combat math in general, because everything has regeneration. The game is so defensive sided that it's kind of ridiculous at times.
Exactly.
Well, we can go into more details on that later, but like MTG has this sort of issue where, I mean, it's alleviated a lot in modern sets, but especially back in the day, like you'll have these like 20 unit versus 20 unit board stalls where neither player can make any headway, and no one wants to do anything because even if the numbers are in favor for one person, the fact that someone can double block, and then if they don't have enough damage to kill both people, it's essentially like they've traded 1 for 1, because then the chance damage is regenerated. Like it is I am not a fan of MTG's combat at all. So I really do appreciate the lengths that Fearsome and other keywords like that have been designed to be very proactive throughout the game's history.
Maybe to explain for the viewers who didn't play Magic, what you can do, for example, your opponent has a 5/4, and then you have 2 2/3s, then you can just double block, and your opponent gets to do 5 damage, so they can do like 3 damage here, 2 damage here. But in the end, your 5/4 just trades for 1 2/3, and the other one just heals up because everything has regeneration. So this just means attacking always feels terrible, mostly feels terrible, and many, especially limited games, just come down to one person is having like a 2/1 Elusive and attacking over and over. And that's kind of
1 and 2 Elusives in MTG are the way you win limited games, because it's just the game gets so board stalled that no one can make any progress.
Okay. And Wick, you said you played a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! This problem doesn't really arise in the Yu-Gi-Oh!, right? Because you just have to attack the big unit over and over. Or like you can't even damage the big unit, right?
Yeah, everything has taunt in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Okay, so let's move on. Wick, which is your favorite keyword you want to discuss?
I'm not even trying to troll, but I think Elusive is like my favorite keyword because it's like, it is such a direct translation of unit combat damage to like over the top burn, and I really enjoy that aspect of it. And I think thematically every single like champion or card that has Elusive really, really, really upsets people, and that's kind of like the style of gamer that I am. Like I enjoy going to tables at locals, playing decks that only like frustrate people, and then just like completely like trolling my opponent. So I think like elusives have like always vibed with me, you know? I was a mono Zed like allegiance like one trick for like so many years, so that Wayfinder nerf like really really hurt my soul. Like I used to always be running like Zoe splashes and just going crazy with elusives. So I think that's very much my favorite keyword in the game.
So you do love cards like Prank, for example, just being annoying to your opponents, and Shellhook.
I don't know. I actually don't play any prank.
Okay.
I don't like interacting with my opponents.
Oh, you said hand. I thought you're just your opponent at all. Just like typical bird player.
No. Zero interaction, dude. We're Yu-Gi-Oh now.
Yeah, Elusive is, I think, very interesting because it's kind of always a different way to push your cheap units or your small units in for damage. And like literally every game has some kind of mechanic. And like, if we bring up our board once more, if you have like a bunch of 1/1s and 2/2s, you want to have them exist in the same realm as a 3/3. You have to have some way to make those relevant. And either you have like a +5/+5 board buff or something like that, like Yordles and Arms, or you give them Elusive and be like, haha, you either have to outrace me with your 3/3 while I continue hitting you, or you have to find a removal spell from a 1/1. And this has been historically very true with many games, I would say, that I've played. And like both Yu-Gi-Oh! Has it with like, I guess doesn't really relevant anymore, but in the early days there were like cards that can attack you directly, basically unblockable.
Attunes.
Like I didn't play much Yu-Gi-Oh! Recently, but
I think tunes.
Attunes, yes.
Yeah, like tune cards are like elusive, right? Because if your opponent doesn't have tune cards, you can't block them. So I made that realization a couple weeks ago, and it kind of blew my mind.
And like the MTG version of this is just flying, and they're like different. Oops, not card name flying, but I hate this. So used to just being able to type in stuff and it finds it. But yeah, flying is basically can only be blocked by flying creatures, or creatures with reach, which we can come talk about soon. There are different historical versions. There's also like horsemanship. If you all know this is basically like flying but different. So only people on horses can block people on horses, which wasn't very logical, but basically it's like elusive.
It's kind of cute.
Yeah, it was super old and then it brought it back randomly.
Yeah, horsemanship's really funny. Very funny.
And yeah, the ultimate elusive is just like unblockable or can't be blocked. I think it's just unblockable.
Oh goodness.
No, can't be blocked, I guess.
It might be errata, it can't be blocked, yeah. It used to be unblockable.
You know, it's funny that we have this sort of pseudo keyword in our game as well, in Legends of Runeterra. We have that big elephant card.
Yeah.
And then we have the new pig, the health pig. And, you know, I think it's funny how the devs have sort of added elusive to these really chunky units in really silly ways.
But what do you mean with the elephant? Do you mean the armored?
I guess
I think talking about the damage. The damage.
Yeah,
element,
he can't get damage, so I guess it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
But you're still disincentivized of like blocking certain ways is all.
Yeah.
So one problem with these cards is that they are historically not very liked or very fun to play against. If you're just sitting there, can't really do anything, can't really break through, and just getting hit over and over again. And I find that people in Legends of Runeterra just complain about it way more often than in other games. Do you also feel this way?
Yeah, I think my really toxic take, I guess, on it is that elusives are as interactive as you are. If your deck has no way to answer small 1 to 2 health units, that means that your deck is not interactive, not that the elusive deck isn't interactive, right? Because if you don't have Mystic Shots, single combats, hushes, Sharpsights, get exciteds, literally any challengers, like there's a reason why elusive decks generally are really like flash in the like a flash coming up. Hey, they're right here for like a meta or so, and then they immediately fall away to the wayside, right? Like elusives exist to be like a almost a check on the meta itself. So like if people are playing like super beefy threats that are able to get like mid-range monsters, like elusive's there to punish them, right? And like the issue is that I think a lot of people's favorite decks or how they fight against elusives, that people just don't understand that like elusives are never the fastest deck. They're never the strongest deck, other than like maybe Ari Kennen, which I guess you could call that an elusive deck. Um, they're often in these situations where elusive is basically a boogeyman, where people constantly complain about it when many other decks are many times stronger, right? So it's really hard to take elusive hate seriously. It's a very necessary function of the game, and if you were to take away elusive, or as some people say, make elusive only one turn, you would need to radically buff characters like Zoe and Teemo to make them good. Like sure, if you want to make elusive one turn only, fine, I don't really care. But like if you do that, you have to buff those units because it's just not the value they generate is terrible. You wouldn't run them then. But yeah,
exactly. And I kind of like how Ari works with elusive. It's just so cool. If like I started really understanding this champion when I looked at Ari, just like a Yordles and Arms, where all of the tiny elusives suddenly deal 3 damage instead of 1. And it just makes a lot of sense. It's a very cool design.
Ari's a really, really cool design, both from recall and a elusive standpoint. I think Ari's really well designed. Obviously, her main issue is that she was just broken on release, but other than that, like she's pretty well designed. I do like her a lot.
Yeah, I think a lot of the community outrage towards elusives is really unfounded because it's just one of the many ways that this game provides players agency in being proactive and incentivizes people to get their units off the board. And I think any moment where players are supposed to be attacking, whether that's elusive or overwhelm or quick attack or whatever, all of these beautiful keywords that we're going to be discussing later, I think that elusive just gets hate for no reason out of all of them. So yeah, I think that we should just love elusives just like we love all the other keywords in the game.
Yeah, and like my biggest problem is with the people like saying I can't play my funny Howling Abyss deck because all these elusives rush me down. Would it really have been better if the opponent just played like a bunch of house spiders and like give them +2/+0 and rush you down? Would this really have changed anything?
Yeah. People complain about elusives like they're the ones linchpinning the meta, but like aggro decks are infinitely faster than elusive decks.
Yes.
Not even close.
Right.
So it's like it's like, guys, if your issue is the speed, there's other problems with your deck, right? Like, and if your issue is like non-interactivity, like there's many more ways like that. Like, oh, hey, here's my spell shield barrier, Lee Sin Overwhelm, who's going to one-shot you from 20 health. Like there's always elements of uninteractivity in this game. Always, there always has been. It's just that I think people just really have a distaste for elusive because it's relatively common as in terms of a keyword. And especially early in the game, there wasn't that many answers to it, right? Like Hush didn't exist yet, Sharpsight didn't exist yet. A lot of the efficient removal did not exist yet.
Quicksand did not exist.
Quicksand did not exist yet. Exactly. Like there's plenty of answers for elusive now, that are not just limited even to just burn spells and challenger, right? Like there's plenty of ways to stop them now.
And it's very important to just see that like each elusive just pays a cost for it. Like Teemo is a 1/1 who eventually will deal more damage, but how's it called? Bloodthirsty, the 3/1 will just deal more damage to you if you let it like hit you twice. And I think many people underestimate that it actually costs you something to have elusive, and it's not just like free.
Even just look to other cards too, like the Flag Bearer in Elites, the 1-mana 2/2 that gets to give something challenger in the future. Like there's some really powerful cards at the 1-mana range that are just do absurd things. Yeah, there's this, and there's also Saboteur, a 1-mana 2/1 that guarantees 1 damage no matter what. Like, it's like I said, Teemo does on average like maybe 1 to 2 damage extra at most per connect, and like he also takes up a champion slot, which is a pretty significant cost. So like like I said, people who have a distaste for elusive are generally people who just don't know how to play against it, or are playing such unrefined piles that they don't understand. Like they can't just sit around and generate value forever. They have to try to win the game.
Exactly.
And elusive just push them too hard, right?
Yeah.
So.
And a lot of like even regions couldn't really exist without elusives. I think like Ionia just doing like fast small stuff. You have to give them something to push damage in. Can't just be like fast and small and don't.
Yeah. The people who propose elusive changes are generally people who don't actually really care about the health of the region or the health of like the cards that are moving. They just want elusive dead because I hate it. Right. So if you wanna actually improve elusive and make it interesting, you're gonna have to do things beyond that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so maybe we can, if we are already on elusives, we can just discuss the first potential keyword, and this one like would be reach, or what currently Sharpsight does, because in MTG like it also has color pies and like red and black are supposed to just kill the flying units, and white and should just outrace it. Blue has the flying units, or white also has flying units. But the green answer was the reach keyword. This creature can block creatures with flying, but it doesn't have flying itself. So basically can block elusives, but doesn't get elusive itself, so only on the defensive side. And in that season of Runeterra, we have Sharpsight basically currently. And it says, I can block units with elusive.
So I was really happy when Sharpsight came out because it proved that they weren't going to do a keyword of it. Because if they were going to do a keyword, they would have made Sharpsight give the keyword that was anti-elusive. I know a lot of people have done reworks of champions and cards where it's like, hey, what about Vanguard Lookout? What if Vanguard Lookout can block elusives? And I'm like, he still will see 0 play. Like that's not the issue with him, right? Like the thing is that a lot of people are coming into this game from other games where elusive is flying, and flying has a direct counter in reach, right? The thing is that silver bullet design, and I'm not a huge fan of that in a game that does not have sideboards.
Right.
So like generally speaking, reach does nothing for your deck. There is no reach deck. That doesn't exist, right? Like there's no unique deck building choices. There's no unique gameplay options if you have reach. The entire value of reach itself is entirely based on if your opponent has flyers, right? And so what that ends up meaning though is that a lot of these cards are balanced as if the opponent doesn't have flying because they have to, because otherwise the cards would be useless, right? So what ends up happening instead is that they're like, hey, here's this broken green card that also, by the way, now can also block flying units. Right, and like that will happen very frequently, where they just make cards that are just objectively insane, that just have reach attached to them, because reach costs nothing to put onto a card because it's so like arbitrary as to how relevant it's going to be. Like the fact, I don't think you should ever make keywords and abilities that entirely depend on your opponent to gain value. Like that just feels really bad, and especially when it's like something as varied as a keyword is, right? Like imagine if we had anti-first strike, where people who first strike instead strike second, right? It's just like where do you draw the line in terms of this, right? Like, oh, what about reverse overwhelm, where you heal me instead? Like it's just like,
oh my gosh,
yeah, that's what I mean. Like it never ends, and I think a big issue with this, last strike, last strike. Let's go, last strike. Extremely slow zombie. Yeah, this is from the Magic the Gathering joke set.
Yes, exactly.
They make fun of this type of shit. Yeah, it's just like when you're trying to make a game that's proactive and interesting, it's really difficult to give keywords that exclusively serve a defensive purpose, especially in the case of things like reach, which only stop one type of thing. Now, in Magic the Gathering, it's a little bit more forgivable because in Magic they have sideboards, so they can change their 60 card deck based on what round it is. So round 1, they might have a more varied deck, and then once they know what their opponent is, they might sub in some new cards that can then benefit them. This is basically part of the design from the onset, because there's a lot of cards in Magic the Gathering that explicitly are like hard counters to like random things. Like Pyroblast just stops any blue spell, which is like insane. Is it called Power Blast?
It's called. I'm just stupid. I'm not used to like you have to type the name on the top and the text on the bottom.
Yeah, it's Pyro Blast. Yeah. Counter any spell, which is not something red can do, if it's blue.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just like for 1 mana red, you can stop like a 6 mana blue spell. Imagine like a 1 mana deny if your opponent is playing Ionia. You know, like it's just like, what are you talking about? Like that's not a fun way to win or lose games, at least in my opinion. It's only balanced in Magic because you have the sideboard where you can be like, oh hey, well like I'm facing this deck, so now I can bring it in for round 2. You know what I mean? Like that's where it's okay. But like if that were a part of the default design of LOR in a game that doesn't have the sideboards and is not based on that system whatsoever, because we use Conquest instead, I'd be very upset personally. I think it'd be a terrible decision to add those types of cards.
And I think that's kind of also the problem with like landmarks and landmark destruction, where people just say if Sundisk is a problem, then you should just print more landmark destruction, more scorched earth type of cards. But it's also just like a anti-strategy card. Like you have to put something else in the card, or you should just say destroy landmark. Nobody plays that ever. And
it's exactly the same thing, because like what ends up happening is that you have to make. So now the issue with Scorched Earth now, right, is that like you have cards like Noxian Guillotine that are supposed to exist as alternatives, right? And it's just like the real thing you would actually do now is you just never run Noxian Guillotine. You always run Scorched Earth, because Scorched Earth will at least always have the chance of destroying your opponent's main win condition, right? Like you don't want to be caught running Noxian Guillotines when your opponent plays turn 2 like Star Spring. You know what I mean? So it's just like that's unfortunately the system that Landmark sort of created, was that they were like, hey, we're completely uninteractive unless you're running these specific cards, and these specific cards are either really good like Scorched Earth, or they're like sunk cost, like, you know, like it's just like, come on, like we probably shouldn't be designing or your own contraption. And they're just like, what the hell, like, God, it's so frustrating.
This card's so funny is because everybody feels like they have to have an answer for landmarks now, because everybody's complaining about it. And I think people fundamentally don't understand that the way Bilgewater is supposed to deal with landmarks is not by playing sunk cost, for example, but by just killing your opponent before they
just kill them with your 800 damage spells. So
exactly.
Like, it's just not something that's ever going to be really fixed properly. One thing that they're doing now, which is a lot smarter, is that countdown landmarks are a lot better for this, because naturally they are meant to become units, right? Typically they're units, or typically they're bonuses, right? Like, and then that's how you interact with them. It's like, hey, the landmark isn't interactive, and that's fine, because what you're going to be interacting with is actually what they become. You know, like, and that's generally a lot better and a lot more interesting as a way to do it. And in that respect, they feel like more like suspend spells in MTG, if you're familiar with those.
Yes.
That's why countdown is basically, at least in my opinion, landmarks done properly. So I'm a lot more cool with countdown landmarks than anything else. Yeah,
exactly. And I don't really like about these landmarks that they still give you the benefit or the bonus if they are destroyed by your opponent. That's kind of stupid, I find. So like,
yeah, exactly, because that's, I mean, like the landmarks as a concept, I think, were unfortunately, at least in my opinion, rather half baked with how they interface with the rest of the game. They really do feel sequestered, and I think that's when landmark decks are strong, like Sundisk or Starspring or what's another one that wins the game, Bandletree. It gets really frustrating, because it's just like you feel like you are now forced to run like multiple landmark removal cards that are all bad. So that means when you don't queue up into a landmark deck, you're playing a worse version of your actual deck. Like, it feels really bad, and I really do hope that they don't, like, stop printing I win cards on landmarks, guys, please.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just not interesting, at least for me. Like, it just means that like you've polarized the game against certain aspects, right? Like how they've been doing it for the current ones, where you summon units out of them, totally fine. I'm 100% okay with that. It's just, or self-destruction landmarks, that's super cool. Like Desert Naturalist and stuff like that. That was great design. But please, no more I win the game if you're not running the 5 cards in the game that can interact with me. Like, please.
And it's kind of even lamer than Elusives. Like Elusives or Puffcaps even put a clock on your opponent, but in a cool way, where you can still interact with them, where you can like do stuff. For example, with Puffcaps, you can put a card on your own deck, so you don't draw a Puffcap this turn. But with landmarks, it's just kind of, I guess you win.
Yeah, like traps are not really meant to be interacted with because they're not taking the board space. But even then, you're right. Like traps you can still interact with them. Like you can predict and fuck up a Caitlyn's things because it shuffles your deck, right? Like there's a lot of ways you can actually like mess around with how traps interact with you. Not in like any really feasible way. Like they're not like super common, but they're not supposed to be. They're not on the board, right? They're meant to be like after effects of spells, not like literally taking up the board state and winning the game. You know, like when Timo has like 300 mushrooms in your deck, it's because he interacted with you 10 times to get there, right? Whereas with like landmarks, they can play almost self-isolated games on their own and just win the game for free. And that just feels really bad, especially against decks that just hard counter you, because it just feels like why am I even queuing? You know?
Exactly. And a card like if you take Timo for example, a card that would say like 2 mana destroy all traps in your deck, that would kind of also be pretty terribly designed because if you if you run into Timo, then it's great, and if you don't run into Timo, that's a useless card in your deck. And Magic has so many of those. I think Yu-Gi-Oh also has a lot of those, Wick, right? They just have like a specific answer.
Have a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And that's just not really that fun. I also played a bunch of Pokemon where you have like the type weaknesses. So if you have your water deck and queue against fire, then you do double damage. It's all like, okay. I guess I was lucky and I win, but really
it just feels like you're winning via matchmaking queue rather than winning via the gameplay, which is always something that feels kind of bad. Like matchups will always exist, obviously. There's always gonna be decks that are good into certain decks, obviously, but it shouldn't be so blatant and it shouldn't be so polarizing, right? Like I'm fine with X deck having a 60% win rate into X deck, into Y deck, right? That's fine. But if like a card in X deck says I will literally instantly defeat any Y deck, then it's just like, okay, like come on, you know.
Okay, I think you had a great Nick.
Yeah, I think earlier on, Roy made a good point, and I think this is kind of what the conversation is about. Is that right now a lot of people just want to have that silver bullet approach, and I think that if that was interesting game design, or if you wanted to really play in a space that X beats Y and Y beats Z and Z beats X, we can just play rock, paper, scissors. I think rock, paper, scissors is actually a very interesting and complicated game, and I think it's very underrated in regards to like how important, like quote unquote literally hand reading, PogChamp. But hand reading your opponent who you've played against multiple times, I think that's like it's like a very underrated skill, and I think that that's not what we want from Legends of Runeterra. I think that as soon as people stop viewing these various keywords as just like something that they hate, and instead start viewing it as the way that the devs have given us a variety of tools in which we can win with, I think we can start having more healthy conversation about balance and about what can be done within the game.
Yeah, I could definitely agree with that, and especially as like the time goes on, people get more and more okay with it. It's just like early on in beta, people complained about Elusive 24/7. Nowadays, it's like not nearly as common. Just on like forums mostly.
I mean, I still hear it from people like every day in my replies and everywhere I look. Like people are still very much thinking that Elusives is a problem in Legends of Runeterra, and I'm like, that Poro Cannon exists, right? Like Elusives like are just completely chumped out 80% of the time, and they're just like I feel like elusive damage, like you maybe get like 4 to 5 damage a game with elusives, and that's all they do. You know what I mean? Like they're just like chip damage, and then like, but people don't nearly complain as much about like decimate. Like I know Skarzig has been going off and on and on and on about how like decimate puts your opponent at 8 HP, and how that's just kind of been a huge limiting factor from how Noxus and Noxus aggro interacts with the game. But if we start looking at elusives and like you mentioned previously, fearsomes and overwhelm, it's all just chip damage trying to achieve the win state of 0 health. So I think if we start looking at things the way that maybe the devs look at it, or at least the way that these keywords actually interact with the game, I think we can have better balanced conversations instead of just having to react to people feeling like they're getting uninteracted on by a concept or a keyword that just hasn't been as dominant as it used to be. Like, I literally was slamming elusives for like an entire year with mono Z, and like I was able to get like a 70% win rate in like plat and diamond, but I had to fight for every single one of those wins. It wasn't a easy deck. Like, elusives haven't been strong for a while. You know, they're not a concept that you can rely on and build an entire deck upon. But I mean, I guess like Ken and Ari, I fully viewed Ken and Ari as like 100% an elusive deck, but I don't think anybody viewed it as an elusive deck. But Ari only was strong because you put her onto the left side of an elusive unit and then got a free elusive attack.
Yeah.
So I think if people didn't hate Ari Kennen for being an elusive deck, then the conversations about hating elusives are just not valid, in my opinion, or confused and misunderstood. And I think that that's why it's important for us to have these sort of conversations, understanding what the mechanics of these games actually do, and not just how they make us feel.
Yeah, I could definitely agree to that, generally speaking, yeah.
I agree as well. Okay, let's move on to the next keyword. It's my turn, and I want to discuss some quotes. Wick first. Wick, you said basically every keyword in the game is just additional nexus damage or it's just burn. How did you say it exactly?
Yeah, I was just saying that a lot of the combat based keywords like quick attack and overwhelm and elusive, all of these sort of keywords disincentivize your opponent from blocking. And you guys mentioned earlier how this game is such a blockers like defensively. There's a huge advantage to this game. You know, you get to put down your block order, you get to react to spells before they resolve. Being reactive and going second is very, very, very strong in this game. And, you know, especially when when you consider the mana bank, passing is very, very good. So I think that these keywords that incentivize you from attacking forward, like quick attack and fearsome, etc., they just all are forms of chip damage. And, you know, they all just help you slowly get, I guess in like, you know, the big meme is like counting down from 20. But I mean, like, what else are we doing in this game? Like, people complain about Vandal Cities, so they don't. If you don't want me to count down from 20, give me my Fiora back. Like, I'll count down from 4. Like, hello? Or, I don't know. Like, I feel like people just complain about alt win cons, but then also don't want to accept that Challenger is burn. Because, you know, when you drop that Flame Chompers to pull their one good blocker out of the way, their Chump blocker, you get to hit them in the dome, most likely. And I think that's, if we start viewing all these keywords as just ways to get around what basic boring gameplay is, you know, like you've said, a 1/1 loses to a 2/2, a 2/2 loses to a 3/3, a 3/3 loses to a 4/4. That's not a fun and compelling meta to play in. And these keywords give us fun and compelling ways to interact with each other's boards rather than just going, haha, I'm bigger than you, haha, haha. That's boring.
Interesting, yeah. I honestly feel like it's the other way around in Runeterra, where the attacker, because of all these keywords, because of all the on-attack effects, has an advantage over the defender, oftentimes. As an MTG, I never sit around and let Runeterra and be like, okay, I guess I'm wait and hope I top deck something. Whereas an MTG, that's oftentimes what the board stalls down to. So I would say, because of these keywords, because of all the different attack abilities, and because devs designed it to be more interactive with cards like Challenger, like how it's just way more interesting for the attacking side. And it's like I played some Magic today, and I was like, where's my challenge unit? I want to challenge this 2-1 away. And I was just like sitting here being hit by 2 with Elusive, and I was like, oh my god, what am I doing with my life? I want to play Legends of Runeterra again.
Yeah, because I think when you start playing other card games. Other card games aren't built in the same way in terms of guaranteeing you that you can like be proactive in your gameplay. You have to be really defensive. In LOR, they're really trying to make it a question of why shouldn't you attack, whereas in MTG, it's more of a question of why should you attack, and like that's like a big issue I think that I have with like most other card games is that many of them are so defensively sided. It feels like I'm just sitting around until my opponent inevitably makes a mistake and then I win. And that doesn't really feel fun to me personally.
Okay.
No, hard agree.
But from this point, like we talked a lot about aggressive keywords, I want to talk about my favorite defensive keyword. And like there are multiple defensive keywords, like Fury, for example, just making units survive combat more often, or like tough. Like really, Lissandro's design is one of my favorite ones. Where you give your Nexus tough. I think they should explore this more. Giving your Nexus like Space Shield or something would be fun. But my favorite keyword is actually Barrier, just because of how it is actually introduced into the game. Because this concept of Barrier exists in other games as well. And in Hearthstone, it always felt like, It was like, because in Hearthstone you have like these hero powers, Divine Shield would stick around on a unit forever until it gets broken. And some people or some characters just had like a easy way to break the barrier on the Divine Shield, and others just don't. And I really like how Barrier translates here, where it only blocks damage and not like card effects, for example, and only lasts for 1 round. So even if you don't have an answer for it immediately, then it's fine. Just have to deal with it for 1 turn, and it oftentimes still gets a lot of value. One of my favorite decks to play ever is like with Fiora and Shen. Unfortunately, that's not very viable anymore, but I really like Barrier. And like in the recent set, MTG also introduced a way of Barrier, where it's like a shield counter, which works completely differently.
It works like how it does in Hearthstone, right? Where it just is there until it takes damage.
No, it also prevents you from being destroyed. So if your opponent would play a Vengeance on your shield counter, it would just take up the shield counter.
Oh, that's interaction, bro.
Yeah,
no,
but
that's interaction.
Yeah, but like Magic has some ways to get around it. For example, you can give a unit minus health and then it still dies despite, because it isn't destroyed. It's just going to be removed by, like, it's complicated, but
you know what?
Effects, yeah.
LOR has that as well, though, right? Like, if you swap the health of a 0 attack unit, it will die.
Yeah, but very rarely does this happen.
Very uncommon.
Like, I know it's uncommon, but like they could definitely make that a thing. And I think that because it's always super goofy when that happens. And I think if the devs started making more cards, that oh my god, formidable, destroy, just kill this. Oh, that's so funny.
You murdered a poor Galio with your design.
Oh my god.
I guess you're thinking of like Topsy-Turvy, or however it's called, like the Hearthstone card.
Yeah.
Oh, right. That thing was crazy for a second, right?
Yeah.
Wait, does it actually show up here?
Just right, yeah.
To do this one. Swap a minion's attack and health.
Yeah,
That's
I really
gender.
liked Priest, swap Priest. I think those were fun decks to watch. I was not good at them.
But I don't think this will really make it into like Runeterra. It is not that cheap. Maybe like Ionia would probably kind of fit into it, I would say. Or like Bandle City, Trickster card.
I think Bandle City, for sure.
Yeah, but I don't know. So what are your thoughts on Barrier? Do you like the keyword? Or do you like other implications more?
Yeah,
Maybe
I think it's interesting. You called it a defensive keyword, but I think it's one of the most offensive keywords in the game, personally.
I agree.
Because Barrier allows you to beat almost every other keyword, even when, like, hypothetically you wouldn't be able to, so you're allowed to take a lot more actions with it. So, like, attacking with a Barrier unit is often super free, especially against certain decks, especially against certain, obviously, mana thresholds, right? Like, you can often just, like, throw the Barrier on and then run at the opponent, and then you have a huge advantage on top of them. Just in general, Barrier feels like a really proactive tool, because the really crucial thing about Barrier that makes it aggressive and not defensive is that it only lasts 1 turn, so you're inherently encouraged to use it. Right? And that means like pushing yourself into combat so that you can make use of it, right? So like, for example, if Barrier was something you only got until forever, right? You would never attack with Lux on the turn you played her, right? But now with Lux having Barrier on the turn you play her, it's like, hey, like I actually have a reason to attack right now. And sure, in a lot of situations you might not still do that, obviously, right? But it actually is at least feasible now, right? And like that's something that's really important with the design. And I think that works really similarly for why barrier is not the same as a spell shield, right? And spell shield is permanent typically, whereas a barrier is not.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah,
I actually really like barrier as well. Do you want to go ahead?
I just wanted to add, I mean, like defensive in a way that it defends a unit instead of giving you like an advantage when attacking. For example, like Overwhelm doesn't really give your unit anything, it just pushes more damage, it's just like purely burn. Whereas like barrier just helps your unit survive. And of course, as you said, I really like about it that you have to be proactive with it. You can't just sit here and like say, haha, I have a shield, you break my shield, haha, I make a new one. That's not really interesting.
Exactly.
I actually think that barrier and regeneration and even tough can be viewed as good offensive keywords because they kind of do this thing where when you attack with a unit with like tough, you have to rethink about how you're attacking or how you're blocking, right? And they make chump blocking infinitely worse, right?
Yep.
If you chump block a tough unit with a spider, or if you chump block a regeneration unit with a spider or with a barrier, like the value of that chump blocker has infinitesimally gone down. Like that's just how it is. And so I think like what Roy was saying, barrier, like that's why it's on Green Fang Warden, right? Is because now you get this scout unit that 100% gets into an attack. There's so many times where scout attacks is troll and will bait you into losing, but Green Fang, like he can attack all the time. You were just looking at him.
I know, but I wanted to put up another scout unit here.
Yeah. Yes, that's exactly why Grizzled Ranger was so strong. You could slam him in, deal a decimate to the dome, and then have a second unit. He reminded me of old Death Rattle Hunter back in the day. I used to play a lot of mid-range Death Rattle Hunter, and I think I really like the idea of you have a card and it pops out another card. Yu-Gi-Oh has a lot of that where you have a card that gets sent to a graveyard and you kind of tutor out something or summon something. And I really like Death Rattle effects that sort of give you more value that way. Especially in a game where we have so much silence and so much ways to shut down engines. But yeah. So I do think that barrier is an offensive keyword as well. I just think that all keywords kind of have both sides, right?
Yeah.
And I think the last thing I wanted to mention on barrier is how it kind of interacts with stack. You can only have one barrier on a unit. So if you double pokey stick, there's no way, even if you have a second barrier burst spell in hand, like you can't save your unit.
Right.
And I think that that's really fun when you have this second layer on top of the game with how like you have spell combat, the timing and the ebb and flow of the stack interacts really funny when it comes to barrier, and I think that's makes it a very interesting card. I used to play like a lot of Mono Fiora, and so being able to time your barriers was very difficult. So maybe Fiora is better now with some of the changes, but we'll see.
No, Fiora is still terrible. Quicksand exists.
Sad.
Yeah, Quicksand definitely obliterates her, unfortunately.
Obliterates not quite, but basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Adage.
What I find interesting is that barrier kinda costs way more than the magic counterpart. Like, I found like when I first saw this card, this one, Boon of Safety, 1 mana, give a unit barrier, like better barrier permanently, and you even get to scry 1. I was like, is this like not broken? And then I saw that cards can even have multiple barriers. Where's the stupid angel? And from playing against it, it didn't even feel that strong. Like, I don't know if Roy, you played this new set yet, but
I haven't played it too much yet. I played the set. I played Kamigawa a bunch, but I didn't play too much of this one yet, unfortunately.
where's the stupid? There's like one angel. This one. It enters the battlefield with basically 2 barriers on it, which is kind of stupid.
Crazy. Yeah.
But for example, I find it kind of funny is there's one card that is very similar to the Intrepid Mariner. Not this guy. A 3-mana 2/3 that gives an ally Elusive, basically. And it also has this one, Wingshield Agent. This one is really interesting. 2-mana 2/3. And it attacks, basically support, give an ally Elusive, and it enters the battlefield with a shield counter on it. And it's basically like the Intrepid Mariner in our game. And I found it very interesting that the shield counter there doesn't really matter that much, because sure, you get your one attack in, but it actually makes the card usable. Before, it would just get blocked and you could get the one attack in, and this way you get at least 2 attacks in with this card, but it doesn't feel like broken, because like in Magic, if your opponent, if everything is regeneration, as we said before, so if your opponent has a 4/4, they just block it 2 times and it still dies.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I like how the game styles are just so different, maybe also from power level, that one card costs 3 mana in one game and 1 mana in the other game. Kind of crazy.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of it comes down to just like the huge differences in combat and how combat math and how the combat design sort of worked out, right? And it seems crazy, especially from our perspective, but I have faith that it's relatively balanced overall.
I agree. And just also these effects, if they would be too powerful, would be very oppressive. Like, why would you ever play a quick attack card or like a damage card if your opponent just like shut it down for 1 mana? Wouldn't really feel that much fun or that fun.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Okay, so I think we've discussed our favorite keywords. Let's move on to some potential keywords that we could see in the game. We've already discussed reach and unblockable. And one I definitely still want to talk about is Deaththouch. And if you're not aware, this is basically it reads any damage, any amount of damage this deals to a creature is enough to destroy it. So this is a 1/1, but if it deals 1 damage to, like, say, a 5/5, it destroys it. And this one is one that often appears on custom cards, from what I've seen. And Roy, you said you don't really want to have this in the game. Why is that?
Yeah, so Deaththouch has a really big issue in MTG specifically. And its main issue is this. You'll notice that this is a 2-mana card that gets a lot of value, and it is a 1/1. Now, 1/1 seems like a bad stat line, but remember, with Deaththouch, you technically have infinite damage. So it's an infinite /1. And then also it has enter the battlefield, you get a bunch of bonuses and some other bonuses as well, right? So basically, this is a 2-mana 1/1 that will almost always trade with your opponent. And what happens when your opponent has a 5-mana 5/5 and they play it and then you play this? They don't attack into you. And what do you do on your turn? Well, you don't really want to risk your 1/1 in case he has some sort of combat trick, so you don't attack either. And so what ends up happening between this game, in this game state, is that, let's say the 5/5 player has like a 2/2, right? And for whatever reason, you never want to attack into them because you want to kill his 5/5 with your 1/1. But then so you never attack into him because you know he'll block with his 2/2. Right, so the issue with Deaththouch causes is that it just creates huge board stalls where neither player wants to attack because they both want to make sure they get the most amount of value possible. And by having a card that trivializes the stats of the game, it can cause a lot of issues with that. Now, there are ways to fix this to make it good and make Deaththouch feasible. But if you were to just say 1-to-1 copy this card over to LOR, I'd be very disappointed with the design of that.
Yeah, I think, I actually posted about this a couple weeks ago. I was like, oh, bring poison into LOR because, poison is that concept
in Hearthstone, right?
In Hearthstone, right? Exactly. And like you were saying, the stats of a poison unit don't matter. Having a 1/1 I kill you is like really funny for me personally, but it's like very, very, very powerful. And then, a couple people were replying and they made a lot of good points about how Legends of Runeterra in this game, big units are already just so terrible. Like, when was the last time that that Nautilus was viable?
Yeah.
Like, Aurelian Soul is barely viable. Like, so bringing in a mechanic that would create another way to just completely invalidate those kind of play styles I fully was able to just like agree and like switch my mindset that is just not should never be in the game. I fully agree with you on that point.
I think there are some really great ways to do it if you want to, but like a passive, quote unquote, defensive death touch ability would be really poisonous, I think, to the game personally. That's sort of my general take on it.
I think, right now the lore devs they do a very good job of making certain things only proc or only trigger at certain times. Like there's no such like support and challenger, all of those keywords are worthless on defense. So if they could make something that was like, oh, when I strike, or maybe not strike, but maybe when I strike while attacking, like how Vi is, when I do this thing that, but only in this other certain situation, let me kill instantly, and I think technically we kind of do have that one card, Rhyme Tusk Fang, that does act like a poison striker against frostbitten units. So I think that when you have a kind of a condition associated with it, like you were saying, I think it can be implemented healthily actually. So I guess we already do have it in the game. Never mind.
Yeah, we kind of do, and I think that's the really crucial thing here is that if you're going to add Death Touch to the game, I think the best way to do it would be to tie it to another proactive measure. So, for example, in the Wolf's case where he has instant kills things at 0 attack, right? He only does that if you frostbitten something or you're hitting a 0 attack unit, which is typically only units that have been frostbitten, or sanded or whatever, right? Like
I hope this just demolishes all formidable.
Yeah, and it also destroys formidable, which is a kind of feels bad for like very silly reasons, but yeah, that is definitely a hypothetical there as well. Yeah.
It's a very bad card.
Yeah, it's very silly.
So Wick, maybe you saw searching before for the stupid 1/1 with Divine Shield. Do you know how it's called in Hearthstone? Can you help me out? It was like a 1/1 Divine Shield. It's really obnoxious and it has poisonous as well.
Oh god, I don't know. That sounds awful though.
I'm sorry, I stepped away. What happened?
Stepped away. There was a 1/1 Divine Shield poisonous in Hearthstone. Do you know how it's called?
Oh,
I was searching for it, but it's...
Yes, it was. I think it was in Rogue.
No, it was a vanilla. I saw it in Arena bunch.
It was a... I
doesn't show up.
It, but
it's so sad. Wanted to
Poison
showcase
Spider?
it. No,
I don't know.
It's like Argent Squire, but with Death Touch.
Yeah, no, I definitely
poisonous.
remember it because it was...
Yeah.
Huh. I don't know.
People will know what it is.
Yeah, I'm sure. You know what? Leave it in the comments, guys, if you remember what that card was.
Exactly.
We would love to be reminded. So thank you.
But it was like so annoying to play against. It was like a 1/1
No, it was
with a
toxic.
shield. Exactly, and it has like the this is like a skull, and it was just like if you played mage, you could just like ping it. And then ping it again,
right.
It was gone. And if you play like warrior, for example, it was like, oh my god, my whole existence is ruined, and it's just so polarizing.
Right.
It's really annoying. I think it wouldn't like some decks like Ezreal Caitlyn would just be like haha flash bomb trap and you're dead, but some other decks it would just be very polarizing to introduce that. And especially like you said, the big units just feel way worse to play than small units because like just from the combat system of Legend of Runeterra, I recently played out a like vanilla combat tournament. I just like made like the 3/3 deck play against all the other decks and the 4/4 deck, and basically the 2/2 and the 3/3 deck already win everything. And then just because like a 4/4 can't block over and over again, it goes to a 4/1 and then it just dies. And this just means smaller units already are stronger and you don't really have to introduce Death Touch anymore.
You know what? This is something that I think this was something I was missing out on in regards to context for Magic the Gathering players, was that units healed at the end of the turn.
Yeah.
So I think Death Touch in that context makes a lot more sense if every single unit has regeneration.
Yeah, exactly,
like in Trundle metas, like Trundle's the only reason I want poison in the game, just because I hate Trundle so much and I don't like any of the decks that he enables or that he's a part of. So Trundle was the reason why I made that Venom tweet. So sorry for the toxicity against all you Feel the Rush abusers. I take it back. Not really. I hate you, Trundle. So
it's definitely annoying.
So make a card that says, if I strike a regeneration unit, kill it. There we go.
But it's already
Right?
silver bullet
bullet,
design.
right?
Yeah. Regeneration, like the healing guy. Healing now damages you instead.
You know, actually, if it made it like strike, if I no, there's no point in making things that are direct counters to a specific thing. It's just very bad design.
Yeah. But I would like some interactions with, for example, Boomerang Blade. And I'm pretty sure they might just bring like Poisonous or something on a champion. Like Twitch, for example. If they
Ooh, yes.
put Twitch in and he's like...
do it on a champion, I think. I think making it specifically special or putting on a champion like that is also another really great way to do that, yeah.
Yeah, making champions really spicy and special, I think, is why we played this game.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Are there any other keywords you would want to discuss more?
Those are the ones I had in mind, but yeah, I'm down to discuss any of them.
How do you guys feel about Attune?
Attune or Attach?
I think Attune is one of the most interesting keywords that Riot has ever introduced into the game, just because of how much I really appreciate and think that the spell mana system is very interesting in and of itself. So I think Attune is a keyword that provides a level of resource management that I don't think we ever seen in a keyword. Is that correct?
Yeah, the way I sort of view Attune is that it's very much like a quote unquote half amount of mana. So like it allows you to make cards that would be too bad at 1 mana, but then decent at another mana. So there's definitely that respect where, like, for example, like there's often that discussion where like, God, what's the card called? The one that makes 3 spiders and gives them all +1/+1.
The Brood Awakening.
Brood Awakening, yeah, Brood Awakening, yeah. Yeah, a lot of people talk about how Brood Awakening is like really bad at its current mana cost, right? And what you could do hypothetically is actually like balance it by giving it having a tune, or I mean you make it focus too, but you could also just give it a tune so it matches that 1.5 amount if you really wanted to. That's like a hypothetical possibility, but yeah.
I don't like a tune in SR.
Maybe we have spells that already have a tune, by the way, if you want to say that. Like Flash of Brilliance basically has a tune 3. But
yeah, there's a what you call it has it.
But I think it's like an interesting design space to explore for sure. Don't know how good it would feel to immediately refund it, and I don't really like how they turned Attune to like a core mechanic of a champion now. Kind of similar to how I like, as much as I like Twisted Fate, I think having I draw a card as a core mechanic just limits you a lot on how many cards you can draw in a round.
Okay. But I think that's okay. So, okay.
Are you okay?
I really like how TF. I think thematically, the fact that TF levels off you drawing, which is like you said, a core mechanic of the game. Like, of course you would. Like thematically, like, haha, like I'm gonna level up if you just let me pass. Like, that's what TF wants to do. He just wants to keep playing the game, you know, and because the longer he plays the game, the more he's gonna win, and that's who he is as a character, and as like that's his like all of his design, right? So I think the fact that he's the only card that has ever interacted with, or excuse me, the only champion that interacts with drawing in this way. You know, we have other cards that interact with drawing, like the Casino Bot, you know, and I think that's a really fun aspect of Bilgewater. Actually, is the whole draw a lot, play a lot, and I think I really find that like interesting that you found that to be a frustrating aspect of his card design, because I think that's what makes him actually super special and is a reason why so many people like TF and why he's so interesting to play, because not only does he just incentivize passing and drawing, he also in his level 2 form starts interacting on the stack very interesting. Like if you've played any level of Twisted Fate, like you are so hyper aware of your burst spells because you get locked out of burst passing through a blue card, and the way that he interacts on the stack, excuse me.
Not an issue anymore. No burst passing anymore.
Yeah, well, there was never. Yeah, exactly. But the fact that you couldn't play a burst card and then like summon was like you would have to be so cognitively aware of the order in which you played your cards after you flipped your Twisted Fate that I think that's I don't know. I'm just going in now about how much I love Twisted Fate, and and we're talking about keywords. So, but he also has quick attack. He's an engine that gets to attack sometimes. You obviously don't ever attack with your Twisted Fate, but he gets off the bench every now and then.
Mm-hmm. Like my point wasn't. I also like Twisted Fate a lot, and my point is that some core mechanics shouldn't really be the core part of the champion design, because as the game develops, as more cards get released, those cards will inevitably become a problem. Like if you ever want to release a wheel card, both players discard their hand and draw 7, or like a glide in Hearthstone, both players shuffles their cards in and draw 4, and your opponent draws 2 or something. Those cards will always make certain stuff broken, and it's kind of the same with
those cards. Are always broken in every game, right? Like Fiber Jar has never left the forbidden list in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because Fiber Jar just is not healthy for a gameplay. Like Pot of Greed is not a healthy card. Like drawing in general in any card game is exploitative and abusable. Yes, like that. I can agree with you on that point. And I think that's why. I think that in regards to you saying that Twisted Fate is limiting that design space, I already think that design space is fundamentally limited because of how strong it is to draw a card. I don't know if you guys ever played Faria or Faria. Mm-hmm. It is a board-based card game where you have to build land to get to your opponent's nexus, essentially. Mm-hmm. And the lands they come in like different colors, and that's kind of how you build your mana pool to summon certain things. It was a very fun game that I think they just moved completely into the PvP route, sadly, because their competitive just never took off. But so every round you would draw a card, you would gain 1 mana, and then you had this little selection, and it said, okay, so at this round, you can either draw a card or you can gain a mana. What do you want to do? And so the way they translated ramp in that game and draw, I think was really interesting. Just a random aside. But I think that draw in general as a mechanic is inherently toxic and is already such a limited design space that I don't think that TF's limitations mattered that much in the context of the cards that we're drawing and playing.
I like how Runeterra has an answer for that in like puff caps, that you can't just like randomly throw every card to draw something into your deck, because then you might meet a Teemo deck. I think puff caps are also one of my favorite designs. We're kind of like
a lot of people love puff cap.
Kind of like moving away very far from our subject. So let's get back onto Attune, I would say. And I don't really like Attune being a quote-unquote keyword, because the only thing Attune interacts with as a keyword is the Power of Champions Power Evolutions. You can't get Attune randomly from keywords. You can't share Attune with other cards. I don't really like it being a keyword. What do you think about that?
That's fair. It's a pretty nothing keyword, honestly. It's really just there to save text, I imagine.
Mm-hmm. And I don't really like how Riot handles these. Some keywords can be shared, some keywords can't be shared, some keywords are positive, some keywords are negative. That's kind of very confusing to me.
Right? Right. I think that's kind of what we were talking about before the pod in regards to like how we have keyword, quote unquote, but in that cooler keyword, you have like ephemeral, you have vulnerable, you have these conditions that can be applied to cards, but are separate from the pool of keywords that can be gained in situations like Pantheon or Victor. So there creates a lot of, like you were saying, confusion. And I wish that we had like terms to use for the ones that could be applied in those situations, like Fearsome, Overwhelm, Elusive, Lurk, um, Lifesteal, Tough, all of those are, yes, these. Perfect. These need to have a name. Because we can't just keep calling these keywords, because that's too confusing. And I think that that's kind of the conversation that I was trying to have earlier. I was like, what do we call these things? Like, what are these things specifically? Because I was looking at the list of the keywords on the wiki, and I know you don't really trust the wiki or believe in the wiki, and have written the rule book on this game. So excuse me for dissenting for a moment, but I just wish that we had a better vocabulary to discuss these keywords and the other keywords, and then because talking about keywords from keywords, it gets really confusing when I say, this is a keyword, but this is also a keyword.
Mm-hmm. And the big problem we have right now, we have the randomly obtainable keywords, then we have the shareable keywords, then we have the other keywords like lurk, for example, that is neither randomly obtainable nor shareable, even deep. I was so sad I made like a sorry deep deck once and it just didn't share. And then we have the negative keywords, then we have debuffs. Like debuffs comes from an old quicksand wording where it says it keeps the debuffs. So it's also like it's debuffs the same as negative keywords. And it's kind of just a mess, honestly. Roy, yeah, what do you think about it?
I mean, like the issues with it are obvious. They're just kind of obvious. It's just like it's very unclear. It's really, really silly. There's a lot of things like that unfortunately I wish they still did developer articles. So I'd love to hear their thoughts on these types of things, but unfortunately they don't. So it's one of those things where I doubt it'll be changed anytime, but it really should. But not much we can do about it, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So yeah, it's definitely always a lot to explain and to show people which keywords interact with which. And yeah, in the end, I still think keywords serve a lot of purpose in the game just by simplifying. If you look at cards games like Yu-Gi-Oh, where they have the same text over and over on each card. Like I remember in Yu-Gi-Oh where they had was like a revolution where you shortcutted Graveyard to GY. I don't really play Yu-Gi-Oh, but I heard that. I was happy that just one word was shortcutted, and it really allows for cards like Akshan to be understandable. I once took all of the words of Akshan together and was like 200 words on a single card, but because you split it up on single things, it's like even understandable. And I didn't even count the keyword stuff. I just counted the actual words.
You show this screen to any card gamer and they don't understand, right? Like, what are we looking at here? Like, look at all these associated cards. I keep forgetting how much information Riot just like spoon feeds us with like these associated cards. It's so well designed. You know what I mean? Like, everything has context. There were so many times in like Hearthstone where like something random would happen and you're just like, all right, I guess that's cool. Like, I don't know what that is, or I can't look into what that is. There's no way for me to look at it in the collection. There's nothing for me to like reference. I have to look it up in the wiki. So like I guess like it's just like a level of complexity and like a burden of knowledge that they've relieved. Yes, exactly, Heimerdinger. Like yes, I think it's very underrated how beautifully Riot has been able to weave the complexity into this game in a way that just allows you to spend time in the client, gaze at the art, and just absorb the information. You hover over everything and it tells you something about the game. And I think that that's so beautiful. Like if you hover over like right now the regions, I just discovered this. It shows you the name. And Bando City has a little flavor text. I think just these little moments where they teach you, like if you hover over the 5 as well, it's going to tell you the cost and what cost does. And I didn't know that. Like, and I think these tooltips and just like how well designed, Legends of Runeterra is as a game is 100% of the reason why they can just throw players into Path of Champions, because the tutorial is the game and the game is the tutorial, right? Like the game is constantly teaching you how to play it and how to understand it because it's so forthcoming with context and with what all these things do. And we have, and I think that that's been causing a lot of drama within the community with these play and cast changes. You have these common random words that are in our society, play and cast, and they don't mean anything. But in Legends of Runeterra, the distinction between what it means to play something and cast something is just as important as the distinction between summoning something and playing something. And like the context of these words that in normal society mean the same thing for everybody, they don't mean the same thing for somebody who's been playing this game for very long. And I think like that's a huge part of why keywords, the ones that like Fearsome and Quick Attack, are so cool, is because Riot has been able to fit an abundance of information into just Quick Attack, Elusive, Overwhelm, Freljord. Like all of these things, all these words, as soon as you just reference one of them, it tells you everything else. And I think that is something that no other game, or at least no other game that I've played, has ever accomplished to this level. So most games come with a rule book, like printed in the box. Obviously, Conan-san, you've written that now. So finally, our game is complete, I guess.
And yeah, I figured, I noticed that I went back to this when playing like Magic today. I started like framing these cards that I play with the same keywords. So this is like a barrier support give elusive card. Like instead of actually reading the card, I just used Legends of Terror terms to understand it quicker. And this was also like one of my most satisfying moments ever. It was yesterday with a new player. We were active on the new player discourse and stuff. And one player just asked, "What is a turret for Heimerdinger?" And I just wrote, I just scroll to the side, and they were like, "Oh my god, there's so many, and it's so awesome." And it was just like so satisfying to see to them be happy basically. And I looked at all of the arts, and they're like, "Oh, that's so cool." So you can just see it.
Yeah. No, it's wonderful. I love it.
Okay, I think this wonderful feeling we all have is a good place to end this podcast. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for your time and your interesting arguments and discussion. If you also want to discuss with us, feel free to join our Rivan Discord. We do poetry there. We do card discussion and just general meta discussion, constructed discussion, whatever. I'll leave a link in the description. Also, I'm going to leave a link to both of your channels. Like Roy, you have a YouTube where you do custom cards and other card reviews, right?
Yeah, it's just YouTube /TheSkilledRoy. You can just search TheSkilledRoy and you'll find it. Yeah.
And there's also a link down there. And Wick, you recently started going on Twitch. Is that correct as well?
Yeah. So I'm streaming on Twitch. You can find me on there as Average Runeterra Enjoyer. I'm also on Twitter. You can find me at Runeterra Gamer.
Yeah, we are all on Twitter. I will also include all of them. You don't have to actually type them manually listening to us. There will always be links in the description. And yeah, with that, thank you both for joining. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Yeah. Goodbye.